Joined now by NHL insider from Daily Faceoff, the Frankly Speaking podcast. He had the big story yesterday that Elias Pettersson is back at the table negotiating with the Vancouver Canucks. Hello, Frank Seravalli.
How you doing, guys?
Doing well.
What a week it's been in Vancouver.
It's always things happening here in Vancouver. We're a noisy market, and there was a lot of noise earlier this week, Frank. Tell us, how exactly did all this come to pass?
I'm told that Elias Pettersson, having heard the noise himself, it's inescapable, really. Just came back to the Canucks and said, "Uncle, enough. I'm tired of it. Let's get this done." And that's what they've been working hard at over the last 48 to 72 hours. As reported, I believe they're working on an 8-year extension, which would be massive. And just a massive development in general for the Canucks on so many levels. If they could get this over the finish line and get this piece of business done and off their plate, it really feels like it changes everything in terms of where they're heading next and what this summer looks like.
When you say noise, what do you mean? What do you think brought him back? The teams were calling on him, that the market was getting grumbly with him, fans?
I think it's probably a combination of all those things.
Okay.
I think hearing that report probably jolted him a bit. Look, this is a contending team in the throes of a Stanley Cup chase. To hear that teams are calling to ask about your availability because you decided you weren't going to negotiate during the season, I'm sure that was probably a bit jarring. And the other part of it is just the reaction to that since then. I don't need to tell you guys, this is a market that tends to light itself on fire, and I understand all of it. There's no criticism in that. It's combustible. And I think in this sense, it feels like, again, not done, but it feels like cooler heads have prevailed and they're going to land exactly, or at least in a place where everyone can be happy.
Some of the chatter earlier in the year, Frank, was about a shorter-term deal, that he might go the Austin Matthews route. You're reporting 8 years. What do you think it is about 8 years that is attractive to him?
I would say anytime someone can hand you a piece of paper that guarantees that you receive upwards of $100 million, probably tends to go a long way. I mean, that's a lot of dough. And for someone who may not like the spotlight and the limelight of that, not having to go through this again in 4 or 5 years, even if it results in incremental more coin, maybe that's not what drives him. Maybe that's not his end all be all. I mean, let's remind you that Pettersson is a really kind of introverted person and doesn't love all this and doesn't love all the hoopla. So that's a pretty good way to avoid that conversation again for a while.
How significant do you think the $100 million mark is in all of this? Because 12 times 8 would get you to 96. But obviously there is some wriggle room, and we don't know what that final number is. But do you think getting up over 100 is significant to Pettersson and his camp?
I personally don't think so. I think if you're looking for fancy round numbers and how awesome of a flex it might be to say it's a 9-figure deal, I mean, pretty cool. But at the same time, the other part of this is you're dealing in a salary cap environment where quite literally every penny counts. You inch closer to 100 million, and that's one less roster player that the Canucks can afford, quite literally at today's minimum salary range. So it does matter. I don't think it matters as much to the Canucks in the short term or the long term. I think they would be thrilled to get this done and over with. And I've never gotten the sense that Pettersson and or his camp is trying to set a new record. They're not trying to topple anyone. And I don't think it's going to make it to Matthews level AAV, but never say never. This is a player that's going to be extraordinarily taken care of.
You reported what you reported. Like, do you think this is imminent, or is there a world in which they agree to a framework, But Elias Pettersson holds true to this notion that he wasn't going to actually sign until the offseason.
I don't know quite how to answer that. I do think that this is something, at least I was told, that it would be something that's completed in the next number of days. I don't know the exact timeline on that. The Canucks have gone quiet, as you might expect. They're in the cone of silence right now. Would it be semantics if you've agreed to terms but haven't signed? I don't know why you would withhold the signature. All you're really doing is risking something catastrophic happening if you've already agreed. What's the difference? But yeah, I would say part of it is this is what the Canucks have been pushing for a long time. And I think they had grown frustrated with it. Wasn't necessarily we never had any sort of indication from him that he wasn't interested or willing to sign. It was just the fact that for the while here, really since October, November, the Canucks have been more or less been given the stiff arm of, it's really hard to wrangle people to the table that don't make it their top priority to do so. And that's the part I think to them that was frustrating, saying we're opening up our wallet here. Take what you want, but you've got to be willing to come to the table and actually do it. And we really need you to do it and get it done because we've got a whole host of other things that we'd like to do in the meantime.
Just quickly on timing is interesting to me because they play tonight against the Los Angeles Kings at home. They travel on Saturday to Anaheim, and then they're on the road all of next week. This is the biggest contract in Vancouver Canuck history. Like, I would expect that this isn't just a press release or something that's announced on Twitter, that they would want to make a pretty big deal. I would assume the owner, management, everybody would be on hand. And so they travel on Saturday, and then they're gone for a week, come back ahead of the trade deadline. But it feels like there is a window here on Friday where the decks are cleared. And do you think it could be done as early as tomorrow?
Yeah, I do. I think your guess is as good as mine. I think in terms of actually hammering this out and getting it done, it's not really incredibly complicated. I mean, there could be signing bonus stuff to work out and or some clause language, but like for the most part, the Canucks have been, I assume, ready to roll on this for a long time coming, and actually sitting down and getting all the T's crossed and the I's dotted shouldn't be all that difficult if they are in agreement.
Do you suspect that his recent play might have caused him to come back to the table, Frank? Talk had said yesterday that, he's only human. There's a lot of noise out there. It could have affected his play. And, conversely, do you think that he may view it as get this done and maybe performance can even improve with the weight off his shoulders?
Well, I'd assume that would be part of the assumption, is that the play would improve with that weight off of his shoulders. But I don't think that there was any part of him that had, wavered in confidence, if that makes any sense, in terms of the player that he is, the caliber, the expectations, and the goals. No. Look, whether it was in Van or whether it was on Mars, Elias Pettersson is going to be a really, really wealthy individual. However that worked itself out. But I can't stress enough from my end, without having insight on Pettersson and why he decided to really, jump out now and do it. The motivation from the Canucks angle is so clear, because if you get through this regular season and you don't have him signed, really what happens is the clock starts ticking until the day that you must file for arbitration. And if Pettersson elected or had gotten to the point where he was electing arbitration, that basically would spell the end of his tenure in Vancouver. Because if he wins a 1-year award, what you're looking at is the Canucks being forced to trade him, because they can't possibly go into next season having him play out a 1-year deal that walks him to free agency. And so time was of the essence. The Canucks have known that and have been staring at the calendar, I'm sure. And this has been, again, a massive development.
Mm-hmm. Now that he's, I shouldn't say signed, but now that a deal is looking
likely,
does this unlock something for the Vancouver Canucks that they were hoping to do by trade deadline? Are there any moves trade deadline wise that can be directly linked to this development?
I would say unlikely. I would think that what it does do, if you wanted to try and really push the envelope here and acquire someone that has term, you at least have a better idea of what your books look like moving forward, a real concrete view. I'm not really convinced that they're going to make a huge, humongous splash. I think they've done that already with Lindholm. And my guess would be, I'd be surprised if they got through next Friday and didn't find a way to add based on how aggressive they've been to this point. But it certainly feels to me like something more bottom of the lineup and on the margins, whether it's additional bottom six help or depth insurance defenseman.
Do we know if they were in on Tanev right to the final hours? And ultimately, what does that say about the cost to acquire Chris Tanev? Now, Jersey got involved, obviously, with a little added retention, so that was a bit of a wrinkle there. But we had heard for the longest time, Frank, that the Flames wanted a first rounder. Was there just no team that was willing to offer up a first round pick for Chris Tanev?
Correct. Yeah, it's the market was pretty clearly dictated on Tanev. When you look at both past trades and the defenseman in the last calendar year that went for a first, Tanev clearly wasn't in that category. And he's a 34-year-old guy who plays a simple game, eats a lot of pucks. You know him. You've seen it up close and personal. But where his game is at right now with a limited skill set, he's still more like a number 4. Not that that's anything to sneeze at, but no one was willing to trade a first-round pick to get him. And the Flames were forced to consider their best option, or what they felt like was their best option among the second round pick teams. And they really liked Artem Grushnikov, who they got back as part of the prospect of this deal, that they feel like he's a mean, nasty defenseman that could certainly be filling out their top 6 in the not so distant future, that they're pretty excited about.
Yeah, I was going to say they must love the prospect here.
Yep.
Right, Frank? Because I think there was a lot of people on the outside going, that's kind of underwhelming based on what we had heard on Tanev.
If you thought it was underwhelming, I would say your expectations should have been readjusted. I mean, I'd been saying for a month now, it's second round pick all day long. Mm-hmm. And the prospect that they got, it's always beauty in the eye of the beholder.
Yep. Does Jersey getting involved as a broker signal that they're going to sell? And we have noted there is now a significant gap there between the Eastern and Western wildcards and the pursuers. Do you see a lot of those teams tapping out and being sellers by next Friday?
Not yet. And I'll tell you why in a second, but the indication for Jersey and getting in the mix here to retain has nothing to do with their playoff standing and or their deadline posture. This was really a smart piece of business by New Jersey in the sense that they've got a ton of LTIR space, almost $10 million. That's use or lose. Like you can't take it with you once the season ends. You might as well utilize all of that cap space to really try and get as much back as you can. So they basically buy a 4th round pick, which not for nothing, they can use in another trade over the next week as additional collateral if they want. And in the meantime, New Jersey's trying to get in this race. So is Washington. And here's why. What they're looking at is not just the games in hand, specifically for Washington. They're 6 back with 2 games in hand on the Flyers. That's the team they're chasing. And so Sean Walker is rocketing up my trade board. He actually takes over the 2nd spot from Chris Tanev. That's out on dailyfaceoff.com. And the reason for that is the Flyers have not really made a lot of headway or progress in negotiations with Walker. But if you really look big picture in the East and you see the Flyers as kind of really that 8th seed, Ristolainen's out, Jamie Drysdale's out, Sean Walker could be traded. Nick Seeler could be traded. You might have just cut off the legs of Philly's playoff chances. That opens up the door for Washington, Pitt, or New Jersey. So I would say there's still a lot to sort out standings-wise over the next few days. There's some really critical games coming up for the Caps, who play both the Flyers and the Penguins in the next 5 days.
Our old friend Tyler Toffoli, look, Gensel's the big prize, but Toffoli has worked once here as a top 6 scoring winger right at the deadline. Understand there are still talks going on there between New Jersey and Tyler Toffoli, but what's your sense of how available he's going to be by next Friday?
To be determined over these next couple of days for New Jersey. If they really fall out, you could see Tom Fitzgerald flip and be someone that sells because there has been strong interest. I would say if that does go down, keep an eye on the situation LTIR wise with Adrian Kempe in LA, because it would be a near wash cap wise between Kempe and Toffoli, and having had him there to win a Stanley Cup, they recognize how easy and seamless a fit that would be. But the Kings certainly wouldn't be alone.
Yeah, well, and does his wife still work for the Dodgers, Toffoli? I don't know. At one point, she was working for the LA Dodgers when they were down there together.
I would say that would be pretty difficult living in New Jersey, but
well, yeah. I mean, I don't know what there's work from home environments now, Frank.
Hey, you don't have to tell me. I'm glued
exactly.
to my chair
You're
in
in
my
Philadelphia, and you for all of Canada, across Canada, from Philly, Frank Seravalli. Lastly, you reported the Canucks keeping close tabs on Brandon Duhaime. First of all, we have a listener asking, what does keeping close tabs mean? And how big do you think the market is for Duhaime? Why do the Canucks like him?
Well, I can't tell you exactly what that means by keeping close tabs, because then I would give away how I learned about it. However, I would say that the Canucks have been monitoring him very closely. They've been monitoring the situation with the Wild in the standings. They're in a spot where, by the way, Patrick Alvina and Billy Guerin are thick as thieves from their days in Pittsburgh working together. And more than that, there's been a number of teams that have been in the mix trying to find out more about Duhaime's availability. So I think he's going to be number 11 on my trade targets board. I think even with Minnesota not waving the white flag, that they're going to have enough interest that they're going to move Duhaime regardless of their posture in the standings. So the Canucks are one of those teams that would like to be in the mix. And as I've said before, I think he's the ideal fourth liner. That guy absolutely flies. He has an edge to his game, and he's a great forechecker and chips in the odd goal, but he's a little scant in the assist department.
Yeah, no, we noticed his offensive.
Just how close are those tabs? I guess is the question.
I'm going to take another run at this. If keeping close tabs means monitoring, does that mean the Vancouver Canucks are calling the Minnesota Wild saying, what would it take to get Duhaime today? Do you have other teams interested? Are you committed to trading him by the trade deadline? Is that what monitoring means, Frank? Help us out here.
Yeah, it means asking the Minnesota Wild to keep them apprised of what Duhaime's availability and status is.
So before you trade Duhaime, give us a last crack, because we might do better.
I think it's been a little more than that, but I would say a lot of those questions you asked, the answer would be yes.
Okay. Is there any other player you've heard connected to the Canucks here, deadline-wise?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I've been in PD world the last few days.
Okay. That's good enough. We like you in PD world.
And we live in PD world.
Yeah, we live in PD world too. And now we're just looking forward to the Frank Seravalli tweet. Done deal, Pettersson and the Vancouver Canucks.
It would be nice to get it. Can't promise it, but we'll see what we can do.
Perhaps as soon as tomorrow. We shall see. Thank you for this. Frank. We will catch up next week.
See you guys.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.